The smell hit them first, before they saw the chains, before they found the bodies, before they understood what the Empress had been doing in the sealed chambers beneath the sacred palace. It was the smell of burned flesh mixed with something sweeter, more corrupt. The smell of suffering that had lasted for months. This was August 802 CE, in Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire. A military coup had just deposed Empress Irene of Athens, the first woman to rule the Byzantine Empire in her own right. The soldiers who stormed the palace expected to find treasure, documents, perhaps evidence of political conspiracies. What they found instead, in a network of chambers accessible only through the Empress's private apartments, was evidence of systematic torture conducted over 5 years of her reign. And the victims weren't enemy soldiers or foreign prisoners. They were Byzantine citizens, men, women, and children, who had committed the crime of opposing Irene's seizure of power. I need to warn you before we go further. This is going to be disturbing. The Byzantine Empire was not squeamish about torture or public punishment. But what Irene created went beyond standard judicial torture. She built a personal apparatus of cruelty that shocked even hardened Byzantine soldiers who'd seen warfare and political violence their entire lives. We know about these chambers from multiple sources. The soldiers' testimonies recorded by Theophanes the Confessor, the physical evidence discovered during archaeological excavations of the sacred palace site, medical analysis of remains found in the palace dungeons, and the testimony of survivors who emerged after Irene's deposition. What emerges is a picture of an empress who didn't just eliminate political opponents. She tortured them with systematic cruelty that served no purpose beyond her own psychological satisfaction. She turned the basement of the holiest palace in Christendom into a chamber of horrors that would have made Roman emperors blush. Let me show you what those soldiers found when they opened the sealed doors beneath the Empress's apartments, and why, even 1,200 years later, the discoveries still have the power to disturb. When the military coup against Irene began on October 31st, 802 CE, the rebel soldiers led by the Logothete Nikephoros knew they needed to secure the sacred palace quickly. The palace complex sprawled across acres of Constantinople's southeastern peninsula, a maze of ceremonial halls, private apartments, administrative offices, churches, and gardens. The soldiers swept through the palace methodically, securing each section, arresting Irene's loyalists, seizing documents and treasury reserves. By midday, they controlled everything except the Empress's private wing, the Gynaeconitis, the women's quarters that housed Irene and her personal staff. The Empress had barricaded herself inside with her most loyal guards. Nikephoros, not wanting to create a martyr by storming the apartments and potentially killing Irene in combat, settled in for a siege. It took 3 days before Irene finally surrendered, emerging from her apartments to accept exile rather than execution. Once Irene was removed to house arrest pending her exile to Lesbos, the soldiers entered the Gynaeconitis to search for evidence of her crimes and to assess what would need to be cleared from the imperial apartments. That's when they found the sealed door. It was in a service corridor off Irene's private chambers, behind a heavy tapestry. The door itself was bronze, locked with 3 separate mechanisms, and showed no signs of regular use. The hinges were covered in a thin layer of dust, but the locks were well maintained and oiled. The soldier who discovered it, a junior officer named Constantine Armeniakos, later testified to Theophanes. The door was cold to the touch, colder than the surrounding stone. And we could hear something behind it, not voices but breathing. Labored breathing, like someone in pain. They broke the locks and opened the door to reveal a descending staircase. Stone steps, well made but unadorned, leading down into darkness. The smell began immediately, that distinctive stench of human suffering that would haunt the soldiers' dreams for years. Constantine's testimony continues. We lit torches and descended. The staircase went down perhaps 20 feet, ending in another door. This one was wood, reinforced with iron bands. It wasn't locked from our side. The locks were on the inside, designed to keep people in rather than out. They opened this second door and entered what would become known in Byzantine chronicles as Irene's Gehenna. Irene's hell. The chamber was larger than expected, perhaps 40 feet by 30 feet, with a ceiling high enough that torch light didn't quite reach it. The walls were stone, but they'd been plastered and painted, a disturbing mockery of the decorated imperial apartments above. Scenes of saints and angels adorned the walls, providing divine witness to the horror conducted beneath their painted gaze. The room was divided into sections by hanging chains and iron bars, creating multiple cells within the larger space. And in several of these cells, the soldiers found people. Living people. Prisoners who'd been in these chambers for months or years, surviving in conditions that tested the limits of human endurance. When the torchlight hit them, they cowered, begging for mercy, apparently believing the soldiers were Irene's torturers returning for another session. It took several minutes for the soldiers to convince the prisoners that they were being rescued, that the Empress had been deposed, that the nightmare was ending. Some prisoners couldn't speak, their tongues had been cut out. Others couldn't see, they'd been deliberately blinded. All showed signs of systematic torture and deprivation. But the living prisoners were only part of what the soldiers found, because in the far corner of the chamber, behind a screen, was something worse. The senior officer who took command of securing the chambers was a general named Michael Rangabe. His report to the new Emperor Nikephoros I provides the most detailed description of what the soldiers discovered. Beyond the main chamber, we found 3 smaller rooms, each dedicated to specific purposes. The first contained instruments of torture, iron implements, chains, devices designed to constrain and inflict pain. These were not crude tools but finely crafted instruments, maintained with care, organized by type and function. The second room contained what appeared to be a medical station, tables, bandages, salves, surgical instruments. This was perhaps the most disturbing discovery, evidence that the Empress had people treating the prisoners' wounds, keeping them alive to endure more torture. This wasn't punishment unto death. This was suffering as an ongoing state. The third room contained remains. Human bones, some recent enough that decay was incomplete, others old enough to be fully skeletal. We counted remains from at least 17 individuals, though the incomplete state of some made exact identification impossible. Michael's report is clinical, military, trying to maintain professional distance from horror. But his private letter to his brother, preserved in a monastery archive and discovered in the 1950s, reveals his actual reaction. "Brother, I have seen war. I have seen cities sacked, populations enslaved, the casual cruelty of military campaigns. But what I found beneath the sacred palace disturbed me in ways I cannot fully express. This was not the heat of battle or the necessity of maintaining order. This was deliberate, sustained cruelty conducted in secret, designed not to serve any state purpose but simply to inflict suffering. The prisoners we freed, 14 still living, had been political opponents of the Empress. Men who'd supported her son Constantine during the succession struggle. Women who'd spoken against her policies. Even children whose only crime was being born to families the Empress considered dangerous. They had been tortured not for information. Most had been imprisoned for years after any information they possessed would have been useful. They had been tortured because the Empress enjoyed it, because she had the power to hurt them and no one could stop her. The surviving prisoners, once they'd recovered enough to speak, provided testimony about their experiences. These accounts were recorded by multiple chroniclers and largely corroborate each other despite coming from different sources. A man named Theophylact, a junior military officer who'd supported Constantine VI in the succession dispute of 797 CE, described his imprisonment. "I was arrested in my home before dawn. No charges, no trial. Guards came, bound me, and took me into the palace through a service entrance. I was brought before the Empress, who asked me a single question. 'Do you regret supporting my son against me?' I told her I had served the legitimate emperor as my oath required. She smiled, I will never forget that smile, and said, 'Then you'll have time to reconsider.' That was 5 years ago. For 5 years, I lived in that chamber, tortured periodically, kept barely alive, while she occasionally visited to ask if I'd reconsidered. I never did, though God forgive me, I wanted to. I wanted to tell her whatever she wanted to hear, just to make it stop. The pattern was consistent across testimonies. Victims were arrested secretly, imprisoned without trial, tortured not for information or confession, but as punishment and entertainment, kept alive through medical care so the torture could continue, and visited periodically by the Empress herself, who seemed to take personal satisfaction in their suffering. This last detail appears in every survivor account, and is corroborated by palace servants who testified after Irene's deposition. The Empress would descend to the chambers regularly, sometimes alone, sometimes with a single trusted attendant, and spend hours there. What exactly she did during these visits was unclear. The torturers themselves were usually dismissed before she arrived, but the prisoners were always in worse condition when she left. One survivor, a woman named Anna who'd been a lady-in-waiting before she spoke too freely about the Empress's policies, testified. She would come down wearing simple robes, almost like a nun. She'd bring a chair and sit outside my cell, just watching. Sometimes she'd ask questions about my family, my beliefs, my regrets. Other times she'd just watch me in silence for hours. The watching was worse than the torture. Her eyes, there was nothing behind them. No anger, no passion. Just cold interest, like I was an insect she was studying. The archaeological evidence from excavations of the sacred palace site, combined with the contemporary descriptions, provides a clear picture of what methods were used in Irene's chambers. The torture implements found included iron chains with adjustable tension mechanisms, designed to suspend victims in positions that became increasingly painful over time. Byzantine engineers had apparently been consulted to design these. They included mechanical advantages like pulleys and ratchets that allowed precise control of the victim's position and stress level. Heating implements including braziers and iron rods of various sizes. The rods showed evidence of repeated use, with carbon scoring consistent with being heated and applied to human skin. Cutting tools, knives, shears, specialized implements for removing specific body parts. These were high-quality steel, well-maintained, organized in cases that protected their edges. Constriction devices, implements designed to slowly crush limbs, fingers, or other body parts. Again, these showed sophisticated engineering. They included measurement mechanisms to track the exact pressure being applied. What's particularly disturbing is the level of sophistication. These weren't crude torture implements thrown together by sadistic guards. These were precisely engineered devices that required skilled craftsmen to manufacture. Someone with technical expertise had designed these instruments specifically for inflicting controlled, measured suffering. The medical station provides additional insight into Irene's methods. The presence of bandages, salves, surgical instruments, and medicines indicates that victims were being treated between torture sessions. This served two purposes. It kept them alive longer, and it prevented infections or complications that would have ended the torture prematurely. A physician named Leo, who'd been coerced into treating the prisoners, testified. The Empress insisted they be kept healthy enough to endure more. I was required to examine each prisoner weekly, to treat their wounds, to ensure they'd survive. I tried to help them as much as I could, giving stronger pain medicines than strictly necessary, treating them gently, but I was always supervised. The Empress wanted them to suffer, but she wanted that suffering to be sustainable. The remains found in the third chamber showed evidence of various causes of death, some from torture that had gone too far, others from infections despite medical care, a few from what appeared to be intentional execution. Medical analysis of the bones revealed repeated fractures that had healed, indicating torture had continued over long periods. One skeleton showed evidence of systematic breaking and setting of finger bones. Each finger had been broken multiple times over what must have been months or years. The most disturbing detail from the physical evidence was something archaeologists found on the walls of the smaller chambers: scratch marks. Deep scratches in the plaster, made by human fingernails, forming patterns and sometimes legible words. Prisoners in their agony had literally clawed at the walls, leaving permanent marks of their suffering. One set of scratches, preserved in a photograph taken during excavations, appears to be a prayer in Greek. "God, see my suffering and remember me." Below it, in different handwriting, probably from a later prisoner, "He doesn't." Understanding Irene's motivations requires understanding her path to power and the psychology that developed from it. She wasn't born to rule. She was born in Athens around 752 CE, into a moderately wealthy family with no claim to imperial power. She came to Constantinople as a bride, selected by Emperor Leo IV to marry his son, the future Emperor Constantine V. She was beautiful, intelligent, and politically astute, but she was also an outsider in the intensely hierarchical Byzantine court. When her husband Leo IV died in 780 CE, Irene's 10-year-old son Constantine became emperor with Irene as regent. For 17 years, she ruled in his name, fighting off challenges from male relatives who believed a woman couldn't legitimately hold power, from generals who resented taking orders from the Gynaeconitis, from religious factions who opposed her policies. She became brilliant at political manipulation, at using the church against the military against the bureaucracy against the church. She survived multiple coup attempts through a combination of cunning, brutality, and paranoia. But being regent wasn't enough. When Constantine VI came of age and tried to claim actual power, Irene faced a choice: step aside or eliminate her own son. In 797 CE, she chose elimination. She had Constantine arrested, blinded, the traditional Byzantine method of disqualifying someone from imperial power, and imprisoned. He died shortly after, possibly from his wounds, possibly murdered on Irene's orders. This matricide, there's no other word for a mother blinding and effectively killing her son, broke something in Irene, or perhaps revealed something that had always been there. She'd spent her entire adult life fighting for power, justifying increasingly extreme actions as necessary for survival. Now she'd committed the ultimate crime, and she had to live with it while maintaining her grip on power. The torture chambers appear to have begun shortly after Constantine's death. The earliest prisoner whose testimony we have was arrested in late 797 CE. The chambers were constructed secretly, accessible only through Irene's private apartments, staffed by guards who were loyal to her personally and isolated from the regular palace staff. Psychological analysis of Irene's behavior suggests several motivations. Control. After years of fighting for power, Irene had developed an obsessive need to control her environment. The chambers gave her absolute control over the people inside them. Their pain, their survival, their every experience was subject to her will. Paranoia. Byzantine politics made paranoia rational. Every noble family, every military commander, every church official was a potential threat. But Irene's paranoia went beyond rational caution. She saw threats everywhere and responded with disproportionate cruelty. Guilt transformation. Unable to process guilt over murdering her son, Irene may have transformed it into rage against others. By punishing people who'd supported Constantine, she was in some sense still fighting the battle that had ended with her son's death. Sadism. Some people enjoy inflicting pain. Irene's regular visits to the chambers, the sophisticated torture implements, the careful maintenance of prisoners in a state of sustained suffering, all suggest she derived satisfaction from the suffering itself. The combination created something monstrous. An empress who wielded absolute power over the world's most sophisticated empire and used that power to create a private hell where she could indulge her darkest impulses without restraint. When the 14 surviving prisoners were freed, they faced a complex situation. They'd been vindicated. Irene was deposed, they were released, their suffering was officially acknowledged. But they were also damaged in ways that would never fully heal. All 14 required extensive medical care. Several had lost limbs or sensory organs. All showed signs of long-term malnutrition and the effects of sustained physical trauma. The psychological damage was perhaps worse. Most displayed what we'd now recognize as severe PTSD, anxiety disorders, and depression. The new Emperor Nicephorus I, eager to establish his legitimacy partly by contrast with Irene's cruelty, provided the survivors with pensions and public recognition. Several were given positions in the imperial administration appropriate to their previous status. But their testimonies make clear these gestures couldn't repair what had been broken. Theophylact, the military officer who'd been imprisoned for 5 years, received reinstatement to his rank and back pay for his years of imprisonment. His subsequent career was undistinguished. He served in minor administrative positions far from Constantinople, apparently unable to function in the political environment that had destroyed him. His final surviving letter, written shortly before his death in 815 CE, reveals his state of mind. The body heals or doesn't. The mind is more complex. I dream of those chambers every night. I wake screaming, convinced I'm still chained in the dark. My family tries to understand, but how can they? How can anyone who wasn't there understand what it means to be completely powerless, to know that someone is hurting you simply because your pain entertains them? Anna, the lady-in-waiting who'd testified about Irene's watching her, entered a convent after her release. She lived until 828 CE, spending her final decades in religious contemplation. Her confessor preserved some of her testimony about her spiritual state. I try to pray, to forgive, to release the hatred. But I can't. I hate her. I hate the Empress with a purity and intensity that frightens me. I know Christian teaching requires forgiveness, but I cannot forgive what was done to me. Perhaps God will forgive her. I will not. Several survivors didn't live long after their release. The physical trauma was too severe, or infections from old wounds proved fatal, or, in at least 2 cases, they took their own lives, unable to cope with the memories. The stories of these survivors were recorded and circulated partly as propaganda against Irene. Nicephorus wanted to justify his coup by demonstrating Irene's tyranny. But they also served as testimony, as evidence that the horrors had actually occurred, as warnings about what absolute power unconstrained by mercy could produce. Irene herself was exiled to the island of Lesbos in November 802 CE. Nicephorus I, showing more mercy than she'd ever shown her victims, allowed her to live in relative comfort with a small household and modest income. She died in August 803 CE, less than a year after her deposition. The official cause was natural illness. She was approximately 51 years old, not elderly by our standards but old for medieval times. Some contemporary sources suggested poison, but there's no strong evidence for this. What we do know is that Irene spent her final months writing a memoir and religious testament. Both documents have been lost, probably deliberately destroyed after her death, but fragments are quoted in later Byzantine chronicles. From these fragments, we get glimpses of how Irene understood her own actions. She apparently viewed the torture chambers not as criminal cruelty, but as necessary political security. In her understanding, the people she imprisoned were traitors who'd threatened the stability of the empire. Their punishment was justified by their crimes. Notably absent from the surviving quotes is any acknowledgement that torturing people for years went beyond normal punishment, any recognition that the systematic cruelty was disproportionate, any expression of remorse or regret. One fragment, preserved in a hostile chronicle and therefore potentially distorted, has Irene saying, "I did what was necessary to maintain power. Power is what protects the empire. Those who threatened my power threatened Rome itself. Their suffering was the price of stability." This self-justification, that personal power equals state security, that crimes against individuals are acceptable when framed as protecting the collective, is chillingly familiar. It's the logic that has justified atrocities throughout history. When Irene died, her body was returned to Constantinople and buried with imperial honors in the Church of the Holy Apostles, the traditional resting place of Byzantine emperors. This sparked controversy. Many believed someone who'd committed such crimes shouldn't rest among the empire's legitimate rulers. But Nicephorus allowed it, perhaps because he'd benefited from the coup against her and didn't want to establish precedents about deposing and dishonoring emperors. The political calculation that had kept Irene in power continued to protect her reputation, even in death. Her tomb was later destroyed during the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453, so we don't know what epitaph, if any, was inscribed there. But Byzantine chroniclers recorded the unofficial epitaph that circulated among the people. Here lies Irene, who proved that women can be as cruel as any man. The physical evidence of Irene's torture chambers was rediscovered during excavations of the sacred palace site in the 20th century. The palace complex, abandoned after the Ottoman conquest, had been partially built over and partially left to decay. In 1935 to 1936, a British archaeological team excavating the palace's eastern section discovered a network of underground chambers that matched the descriptions in Byzantine chronicles. The main chamber, with its disturbing painted walls, the smaller rooms with their specialized purposes, the evidence of sustained human habitation under terrible conditions. The archaeologists found items that corroborated the historical accounts: chains still attached to walls, metal implements consistent with descriptions of torture devices, human remains in a sealed chamber, and those haunting scratch marks on the walls. Carbon dating and analysis of coins found in the chambers confirmed they were in use during Irene's reign and abandoned shortly after her deposition, exactly matching the historical timeline. The discovery caused considerable controversy in Byzantine studies. Some scholars initially doubted the accounts of Irene's cruelty, suggesting they were propaganda by her enemies. The archaeological evidence made denial impossible. The chambers have since been partially preserved and are occasionally accessible to researchers, though not to general tourists. The Byzantine government that manages the site has decided the location is too disturbing for casual public viewing. I've spoken with archaeologists who've examined the site. They describe it as profoundly disturbing, not just because of what happened there, but because of how mundane it looks. These aren't dramatic dungeons from horror stories. They're well-constructed underground rooms that could be storage chambers or workshops, if not for the chains on the walls and the evidence of human suffering. One archaeologist told me, "What haunts me is how organized it all was. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was systematic, planned, engineered. Someone designed these rooms specifically for causing suffering. Someone maintained them carefully. Someone thought about the optimal layout for torture chambers and implemented that design. The bureaucratic efficiency of it is almost worse than the cruelty itself." Irene's torture chambers left multiple legacies in Byzantine history and consciousness. First, they contributed to ongoing debates about female rule. Byzantine culture was already uncomfortable with women holding power. Irene's cruelty was used as evidence that women were too emotional, too vindictive, too prone to personal tyranny to rule effectively. This is, of course, nonsense. Male Byzantine emperors committed plenty of atrocities, but it shaped Byzantine political thinking for centuries. Second, they became a cautionary tale about unchecked power. Byzantine political philosophy already recognized the dangers of tyranny, but Irene's chambers provided a visceral, specific example. Later emperors were sometimes warned not to become another Irene, meaning not to let power corrupt them into personal cruelty. Third, they contributed to the Byzantine tradition of palace intrigue and secret violence. The empire had always had a dark side: assassinations, poisonings, political murders. But Irene's systematic approach to torture influenced how later rulers thought about eliminating opponents. The idea of maintaining secret facilities for dealing with enemies became part of Byzantine political culture. Finally, they serve as historical evidence of what humans are capable of when they have absolute power and no accountability. Irene wasn't a monster in the sense of being inhuman. She was a capable administrator, a shrewd politician, a patron of arts and religion. She was also someone who tortured people in her basement for years because she had the power to do so, and no one could stop her. The soldiers who found those chambers in 802 CE were hardened military veterans. They'd seen war, violence, cruelty, but what they found beneath the sacred palace disturbed them so deeply that their testimonies, recorded by multiple chroniclers, conveyed genuine horror even across 12 centuries of distance. What haunted them, what should haunt us, wasn't just the suffering Irene inflicted. It was the banality of it, the well-organized chambers, the carefully maintained instruments, the medical care that kept victims alive for more torture, the bureaucratic efficiency of systematic cruelty. It's a reminder that evil doesn't always look dramatic or monstrous. Sometimes it looks like an empress in simple robes, sitting quietly watching someone suffer, taking notes on what methods work best. That's what the soldiers found in Irene's torture chambers. And that's why, 1,200 years later, the discovery still has the power to disturb anyone who truly understands what happened in those sealed rooms beneath the most powerful throne in the world.